Don't forget, on the 18th of June, we'll be marking the 80th birthday of Paul McCartney with a special Word in Your Park in Holland Park. Some guests announced, more being announced all the time. Get your tickets below.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Welcome to another Word in Your Attic, and our guest here posted a piece recently about how he was fine-tuning, or as he put it, spring cleaning his massive record collection. Much fond talk of Chad and Jeremy and the Zombies and Scott Walker, and we thought this needs closer inspection.
Absolutely.
What other treasures lurk within? So welcome aboard to the music writer and author Tom Cox. Tom, it's lovely to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
And where are you? You're in the middle of Dartmoor, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm on the kind of southern edge of Dartmoor in a lush, mossy river valley, right next to a river actually, which is very mellow today, but can be an absolute beast, and sometimes feels like it's about to come into my house.
So have you got a house big enough to, presumably you got a house big enough to house your record collection? Is that an issue when it comes to somewhere to live?
It is, and I've moved a lot. I mean, I've moved 23 times in my life, and that's. I mean, I'm still only 46, so it's like every 2 years on average. That it does include like childhood moves, but I've in the last sort of 10 years,
it almost suggests criminal activity. It's incredible.
I've carted this record collection all over the country: Norfolk, Peak District, Somerset, Devon. And I mean, it's just about, I'm looking at it now, you can't see it, it's on the other side of the room, you can just about see it there.
Oh yeah.
It's I mean, I'm trying to be one in, one out at the moment, because I am kind of about at my limit of space. I could perhaps manage like another box of 100, but I'm trying to be really disciplined. But it's
literally
hard.
when you buy a new record, you feel you actually have to sell another to accommodate it.
I'm just trying to be really brutal and sort of saying, like, you know, this is nice, but do I need it? It's fine. It's a nice record, but am I going to like be compelled to listen to it in the future? And also like, and then you start getting other questions like, are you just keeping it as a interesting historical artifact? So are you an archivist or are you a music lover?
How do you keep things? Are they alphabetical? Presumably they are. Must be, surely.
Yeah, they are. There's none of that nonsense like by genre or chronological or any of that stuff. It's simple alphabetical.
So what's your beginning A and what's your final Z? Do you know?
God, beginning A. I think it's ABC.
Okay. We had Aardvark the other week.
We did. Stephen Wilson. He had Aardvark and then ABBA, and I think it was Zebra, wasn't it? With two Z's.
No,
ZZ Top.
ZZ Top at the end. It's obviously
always ZZ Top at the end.
Yeah, it is.
I think I did have ABBA on vinyl, but I got rid of it, and I actually regret that because I do really like ABBA, but that was another spring cleaning job from the past.
What have you got rid of recently? Break our hearts by telling us.
Oh my goodness, I'm just trying to think. They tend to go out of my mind because I'm sort of focused on all the exciting new things that I've got. More than that, I think there's probably some quite nice country albums. Actually, something I did get rid of was the second Jethro Tull recently, which that was quite harsh, I think.
What is the second Jethro Tull?
Is that Stand Up or is that the third?
Stand Up, yeah.
It's Stand Up, but that's got that wonderful cover with the where they stand up, the woodcut.
It was an original. I think it was a second pressing, and it was all in perfect condition because most of those copies of that are all ripped up, aren't they?
You're a hard man, Tom. That's extraordinary.
That really is.
I regret that.
That's a record that even if you didn't like it, you'd want to keep it because it's such a beautiful sleeve.
Exactly. But I did keep the first one. That's the only Jethro Tull album I've kept. Because people always say, I'm always saying, like, I love flute on records. Like, you know, if there's a record, I find a record I've never seen before and I see it's got a song about a witch and some flute on it, I'm like, yeah, I'm buying that. So I would love Jethro Tull, but it's more like I quite like them, but they're not a big one for me.
So does that extend to Quintessence? We were talking to John Lydon last night, and he was enthusing. Actually, he wasn't enthusing.
No, he
Just the
wasn't.
opposite. He was saying absolutely terrible. So the most disappointing album he'd ever bought was by Quintessence.
Quintessence.
I did buy one of theirs recently. I've tried them a couple of times because they've got lots of Eastern influences, haven't they? And I'm very into that. But I'm still kind of test driving one of theirs. I think it's their second one.
Test drive.
I'm not sure. It's having a stay of execution.
Well, they'd be very thrilled to know that.
So are we going to start where we normally start with these chats by asking, can you remember the record player that was in your home when you were a child? Or was there one?
I definitely can. It wasn't a fancy high-end record player. It was one of those music centers. So it had radio, tape deck, record player all together, and it was always on. I lived in North Nottinghamshire, in quite a small house in not a particularly picturesque village, like a mining village. And what I remember is the neighbour used to threaten my dad. The neighbour was called Frank and used to threaten my dad for playing music too loud. I think my dad played jazz too loud, and the neighbour threatened to beat him up.
God, that's nice.
and I think he probably did play jazz too loud. But jazz, I do like jazz, but that's not my earliest memory. My earliest memory is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. But my mum tells me that's not a real memory, because she said when they were playing that, I was still in the womb. They played that constantly when she was pregnant with me, but somehow it's part
prenatal
of me
awareness. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again, Mark.
A sort of prenatal awareness.
There you go. People do that, don't they?
In Jude Rogers' recent book, she said there was a scientific experiment where they played music to pregnant women and then tested the babies later on to see if that music was familiar, and it was proved to be familiar if they'd heard it before they were born, which is pretty astonishing, really. So they are.
I think you're a really good sort of honest judge of music when you're a baby as well.
Yes. Oh, it's the last time you are, actually.
Yeah.
It's the only time. No baby is ever trying to position himself or herself. No baby is ever trying to impress other babies.
I'm too cool for this. That's right. I'm too cool for the teddy bear's picnic.
Absolutely. I mean, I sometimes think like my taste in music now is more similar to my taste in music when I was 4 to my taste in music when I was 17.
Right. Okay.
Well, that's always the case, isn't it? Because when you're 17, you're the most agonized about what you should and shouldn't like.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not a natural decision at all. It's a bit of self-branding, isn't it?
And I've been going.
What did you first buy for yourself? Can you remember?
The record I first bought was actually Lexicon of Love by ABC. The first one in the collection. Right. But I say that, but the honest answer is that I bought. So my dad had bought me records before, like he bought me Queen's Flash Gordon theme. I remember that. But then he actually gave me some money. We went into Revolver Records in Nottingham, and he said you can buy 2 albums. And I bought Lexicon of Love by ABC and Rio by Duran Duran. But I do tend to keep the second one more quiet.
So how old were you then? You were a young sort of teenager, or what?
No. I think I was 7 or 8 at this point.
Right.
Because I was
2 LPs. That's
incredible.
I was nuts about music. I had this strange thing where I was absolutely nuts about music right up to the age of about 11, and bought smash hits religiously. And and then in my teens, I kind of lost it. I just became this weird sort of sporty creature who didn't know much about music, and then came all the way back to it at 16, 17.
Who was on the cover of Smash Hits when you were buying it? Always interests me, this.
Oh, blimey. Who would? Howard Jones, maybe?
Oh, right. The Riddle.
Yeah. I tell you what, the Riddle. I always think about this. The Riddle.
That comes up in this a lot for some reason. Yeah.
Really, it's his best song, and it should be an acid folk band should cover that, because it'd make an amazing acid folk song.
Yeah. But
it was my mum and dad had these friends, Pete and Jean, and their daughter Jane was 2 years older than me, and she had all the posters on her wall of Duran Duran, Nick Kershaw, Human League, and everything. So she was like my musical mentor at this point.
Where were you buying records? Can you remember?
I mean, I think it was Co-op in Nottingham and this little, I remember a long, thin record shop in Nottingham called Revolver. And that was when I was a preteen and I'd go in with my dad. But then when I was a teenager, obviously, like everyone in Nottingham, it was Selectadisc, because Selectadisc had 3 shops on one street, and it was heaven.
So you just go in there and pass the time looking at records that you couldn't afford to buy and so forth? Do you go through that stage?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, mostly it was CDs. It was the era of CDs when I was 17. And I stopped thinking about vinyl for a few years at that point. But I remember, like, me and my mates, we used to go in there so often. We were really paranoid that the employees were looking at us all the time because we were always in there, and that they hated us just for being in there. But then I actually ended up making friends with one of them and realized they were really nice and they weren't as scary as I thought they were.
So have you still got your CDs?
No, they went
really?
long. I've only got 2 CDs, I think, apart from maybe a couple that people have given me recently that I've got in the car. But I've got 2 CDs, and they're ones that I did the sleeve notes for. That's the only reason that I kept them.
What were they?
I did a best of the Guess Who for BMG, where I selected the tracks. That was about 20 years ago. And I think I did a best of Jefferson Airplane. Oh, and I've got one more, which is my friend's acid folk band, Circulus. I've got their first album on CD because I've got a very strong affection for that record. And it's super rare now. It's one of those weird CDs that are worth over £100.
So when did you become a kind of record collector, do you think, rather than just somebody who's just buying records? You thought, I'm now going to build a big old library.
I'm still unsure about this, because I think I've become more of a collector, but it's more like the historian in me, because I suddenly realized these things, most of my collections from 64 to 74. And these are like albums that are mostly over 50 years old, and they're suddenly historical artifacts. And I've got more into that side of things, just how beautifully they're produced, the cardboard, the sleeve art, and I'm much more into that now. But also, I'm not a completist, and I think, like, maybe to be a proper collector, you've got to be a completist. I don't need every record by my favorite artists. I will mostly stop at, with a lot of people who are good in 67, I've kind of I'll stop at 72, because a lot of them tail off after that.
That piece that I was talking about earlier on that you posted about record collecting, that it was titled "A Pleasant Illness: Thoughts from the Desk of a Vinyl Nerd," and it just made me think: do you consider this to be a kind of an affliction as well as a recreation? I mean, can you, for example, walk past a charity shop without going in and looking at the records? No,
I can't, and I can't walk if I look in a junk shop window and I can see a pile of records at the back. I can't not do it. I'm really bad. I'm not a great user of time, because I sort of, a lot of the time I'm very unrealistic about time, particularly when it comes to records. I'll go out and I'll think, okay, because I write a lot about walking and landscape. So I've normally got sort of a day planned where I'm like, okay, I'm going to explore this new bit of landscape. I'm going to do a 12-mile walk. But I just happen to have seen there's a record fair on the way. I'll be in and out of that in 45 minutes. That's what I tell myself. And I look at my phone at the end, and I've been in there 3 hours, and all of a sudden,
and you're lugging home about half a ton of acid folk.
Or are you? I mean, because I've never really been to a record fair or anything like that. I mean,
really?
No, I don't think I ever have.
They're fantastic. They're where it's at now, because charity shops, I'm sure they are. Charity shops are so overpriced, because charity shops, most of them, they just go on the Discogs price now.
Right.
Whereas record fairs, if you buy sort of 5 or 6 records off a dealer they're often very generous with the price.
So if you spent your 3 hours at a record fair, on average, how many would you come out with?
It's definitely gone up in recent years. It used to be about 10, and now it's about 25.
Really?
Wow. But it's bargains, a lot of the time.
So of those 25, how many would be, wow, I can't believe I'm so excited I've got this? And how many would be, oh, well, it might turn out to be interesting or something?
It's probably like 2 or 3 that are like, oh my God, I've been looking for this for ages. I've got it. And then there's probably like another 5 to 10 where I'm kind of like, I don't know anything about this, but it looks interesting. It's got like a psychedelic photo of a horse on the cover, so I thought I'll buy it. It's more that kind of approach. And then there's a few other things where I've gone, well, I've always kind of wanted this, and I think I like it, and it was a good price. So it's
So how often now? You're familiar with an awful lot of records. We're all familiar with an awful lot of records, but you're probably more familiar because you spend a lot of time in record fairs. How often do you see things that you've literally never seen before, and you're just amazed that it exists?
Yeah, you didn't know they existed.
That's what it's all about. That's definitely. But it gets a bit like, I think it's, you have a sort of blindness with it sometimes, because, you know, do you ever have that thing where there's a word that you learn its meaning, and then all of a sudden the word's everywhere? It seems to come up again and again. It's like you've never noticed it. And that seems to happen with records. I'll see something and I'm kind of like, oh my God, what is this? I've never seen this before. I think I've got.
Give us an example.
Yeah, give us an example.
So this was one. This was about 7 years ago. I went into Oxfam and I bought this record by Morning. Have you come across this at all?
No,
I don't believe I ever have.
Have you heard of them, Dave? I'm not sure I've even heard of them.
I can't say I have. So hold it up. Is it UK? Is it UK?
I think it's the UK pressing of it. It's on Liberty, and I think
so. It's probably
Are they a British group then?
No, they're American. I think it came out in 69, no 70, and it's like a mixture of the first band or second band album. So it's quite rootsy, but it's kind of dreamy and psychedelic as well. Like the cover sort of suggests.
Sounds brilliant.
And I just flipped when I put it on, because it's one of those, it's exactly how you want it to sound. It's kind of like, here's another record that you've never heard, but it's as good as the band were.
Do you mean it sounds like it's cover?
Yeah, it really sounds like
that's good.
And that doesn't always happen. It happens a surprising amount, but it doesn't always happen. So then all of a sudden I saw this record again and again. And I've bought it with friends and things since that.
So you bought multiple. This is really interesting. So Morning, this is an American group, had a record out at Liberty. They will have had about 200 copies pressed in the UK in 1970. Most of them will have gone and skip, whatever. I've never seen it. And I used to spend all my, walking time in record shops. I've never seen it. But the idea that you found multiple copies of it 50 years later is just absolutely
extraordinary.
It's really strange, but I do that as well. I see these things and they're so special, and I know they're rare and they're not mega expensive. Like I think I paid about 18 quid for that, and now you can probably get it for 30, 35. But I just see them and I'm like, I know someone who'll love this, so I buy a lot for friends as well, because I've got.
So you buy multiple copies, like £25 each of a.
I probably
like that.
Because every home should have one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you ever think about how these things got into the record fair? Because presumably with a record like that, somebody must have bought it in 1970.
Yeah.
And it's just sat around. And then, I'm sorry, they probably died.
Yeah.
And somebody relatives
unaware of its worth, offloaded it.
And they wouldn't make a lot. Nobody's make a lot of money out of this at all. But it's the idea that it just. You said I always look at second-hand books in charity shops, and I think, oh God, somebody's died. You can tell there's a whole set of detective novels.
Absolutely, it's a bit ruthless and sad, and that a lot of these dealers, they're getting their stuff because they're buying in bulk. They've found out someone's doing a house clearance or something like that. Yeah. I do remember an incident about 4 years ago. I was in a record shop in the West Country that shall remain nameless. I'd heard that a collection had come in. I was in another shop and I overheard a conversation. Someone saying, "Oh, there's a big collection just gone into there. They're in boxes. They're all over the place.
Oh, they're in boxes,
and they're not priced." And I kind of rushed over there, and apparently it was an old guy had died who'd worked for a record company in the 60s.
Oh, God. Gold mine. Jackpot.
He had like an amazing collection of psychedelic stuff, funk
white
stuff,
labels.
But also like white labels of 80s things like early Smiths pressing.
Oh my God.
And people were going mad. It was a massive bun fight in there. But the truth is, it looked way more exciting than it was, because you took this stuff up to the counter. I took 5 records up to the counter. They hadn't been priced yet. And the guy at the counter just looked up, what's the price on Discogs for these things, and then stuck a label on it, and that takes all the fun out of it.
It does.
There's no bargain there.
No, it's not random at all. There's no.
So I just bought like 2 things just for the sake of it, but I didn't get a good price for them.
So you keep talking about bargains. Give us an example of a great bargain that you once got.
Oh gosh, that'd take some time. I mean, something. I'm sure I got something. Oh, I got a record from a boot fair 2 weeks ago by a band called Dust, who are like an early sort of proto-metal stoner rock band. And it's got these kind of flying wizards on the cover. So I thought it looked interesting.
He likes a wizard, doesn't
Flying wizards, that's brilliant. Because you like psychedelic, you like sort of psychedelic
like
horses.
Wizard, but I'm not that into
witches and flutes.
I'm not. Yeah, I do like that, but I'm not when it really goes over the top. That kind of that genre, that wizardy, proggy genre. I'm not so into it. I kind of stop before it gets carried away in like 1973. Like I'm sort of into Yes, but I'm not into the extremes of prog.
Fair enough. It's got to have limits.
Yeah.
What have you bought recently? Have you got anything there that you bought recently?
Well,
show us some more stuff you got there.
Here. This is interesting. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Susie Hendricks, Hey Joe. This was a recommendation from my friend Will Twynham, who has heard every record ever. And it was not much. It was like 3 or 4 quid. And it's kind of like a disco cover of Hey Joe. And it works so well, but I know nothing about this person, Susie Hendricks. You just cannot find a thing about it online.
Really? You've gone looking and you can't find anything about that? Because that was one of the questions I was going to ask about your group earlier.
Yeah.
Presumably when you find it, I can't remember, morning.
Yeah.
Morning. When you find them, presumably now you can look up about them and you find, he went on and he joined whatever. No?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's really rare that you can find nothing about one person, because I always do this and then it gets very expensive, because of course you've bought the record they made in 1970 and you realize they were in a garage rock band in 65 that sounds really interesting, so then you want to get that as well, but this is
nothing there at all with her.
No, nothing at all. I wonder if she recorded under another name. If this is like a joke
be. That's
name or
do you know that Dave Marsh book, The Heart of Rock and Soul, where he lists the 1,001 greatest records ever made?
I've heard of that.
It's a really good book. And anyway, 1,001, and the 1,001st is a record by, I can't remember her name, Joyce something, and it's called No Way Out, and he just writes this piece about it. It's a soul record that he heard on when he was working on a college radio station in the 60s or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought this is such a cool way to finish his book, because he's made up this record. He's made up the idea that there's always a record you can't find. I thought that is such a good idea. And then 10 years later, I discovered, no, it's real.
Oh, no way.
It exists. And I was kind of disappointed. I thought the idea that there's always something you can't find is brilliant, because I think with Mark and I, we were talking about this recently. Tom Waits said not long ago, he said, with the internet, if you're sitting there with people and they want to remember something, they just look it up. He says, we used to wonder. I missed the wondering.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good point.
You did.
Actually.
Such a magic to that. And I was like that when I was buying my first records as a teenager. There was just no information.
No, absolutely.
Well, Dave and I are old enough to remember going to see bands and not knowing what they were going to look like, which now seems absolutely extraordinary. You would have heard about them or read about them in the Melody Maker or something. You'd go and see them, but there was actually, you had no access unless you had one of their records. And occasionally even their records didn't have the picture on it. And maybe they'd never been written about in the press. So it was
but you probably had a strong idea in your head of what they might look like.
You used to look at the instruments on the stage and work out who would be occupying that slot and what would they look like, the individual members. It was really thrilling, actually.
But going back to what Dave was saying about lost records. This is something that I've been thinking about so much over the last 2 years, because my new novel, there's a lost record at the centre of it.
Oh, really?
And it's in an era when records could get properly lost.
Is this Villager? What's your new?
Yeah, so it's this one here.
Oh, right, good. Yeah.
The other day. I mean, it's not about the book's about a village and about all the folklore surrounding a village. It's over the course of 2 centuries, but this record's always in the background, and it's a fictional Devon village on some fictional Devon moorland that's a bit like Dartmoor. And this Californian guy escapes the west coast of America because he was born in the UK, and he tries to find his roots, and he comes back and he goes to Devon, and he just bums around, meets various people, gets inspired by the landscape and scenery, and he makes this sort of psych-folk album called Wallflower. Unfortunately, the master tapes get lost, but then a sort of a Bert Jansch-like figure discovers them a couple of years later, puts them out on his label, but by this point it's the punk era, and that sort of stuff is not as fashionable anymore. No. The record's doesn't get well received. The guy's very publicity shy and troubled, but over the years after that, it becomes a record that's worth $2,000 because there are so few copies. And then there's all these record collecting nerds and music journalists who are going nuts about it. And as I was writing it, I was hearing it in my head, exactly what this record sounded like. So I thought, well, the book should have a soundtrack. So unfortunately, I just happen to know a very talented musician who has an encyclopedic knowledge of psych-folk and just basically all kinds of music from about 65 to 69. And so he's recorded the record and trying to make it as authentically 1968 as possible. And we've brought that out with the book, and it Brilliant. Sounds amazing. It sounds almost exactly like I heard it in my head.
What is the great psych-folk masterpiece in your mind then?
Oh, the great psych-folk masterpiece. Oh my God, an actual one. Crikey. See, I was listening to a lot of Sandy Bull when I was writing this. But that's more kind of primitivist folk, and Robbie Basho as well. Right. But they are really psychedelic, but they're obviously there's not really vocals on there. It's more kind of drony sort of feel. But I suppose I was thinking of those things. I was thinking of Mark Fry's Dreaming with Alice. Do you know?
Yes. That? I went to see him when he reformed must have been about 7 or 8 years ago. Extraordinary guy. He made that record in Italy, didn't he?
He did, but what was really weird as well with that is that he wrote a lot of it when he was living behind my old house in Devon, because I lived in this place called Dartington Hall.
Oh, right. Okay.
What, the art school?
What used to have the art school
near Totnes?
Yeah, that's right. I lived there for 4 years, which was, a lot of this, even though I hadn't really decided properly to write this book, a lot of the research for it kind of came out of the atmosphere of that place. And I read about the history. And on the note to Dreaming with Alice, the reissue, Mark Fry talks about how much of it was inspired by that environment, that very laid back.
There could not be a more psych-folk place. Actually, it has a tilt yard, doesn't it? It has Henry Moore bronze sculptures about the cypress trees. How incredible!
Didn't one of your sisters go there?
She did. Yeah, she did. You're absolutely right. Yeah, she went to the art school, so I know it very well. We used to go down and see her. It was absolutely.
Did you have a good time there?
She loved it. Oh yeah. I can remember her ringing me up and I said, "How is it?" She said, "It's amazing. And we call all the teachers by their Christian names, and we don't wear shoes." She went to Dartington looking like, I don't know, probably looking like kind of Lulu. And she came back with kind of a great curtain of long centre-parted hair and flares and no shoes.
Just right. Yeah. That's exactly.
And a boyfriend called Huge, and whose friend was called Chutney. I can remember it really well. I was so impressed. And an incredible string band album.
This is a weird connection because there's actually a fake Dartington in the book. which is it's obviously based on some of it. And there's a sound engineer guy, hippie guy there who records Wallflower, and he's called Chickpea.
That's very good.
So, I mean, and it's still a bit like that, particularly like a few years ago when I lived there. You just sort of, I'd walk out the back of my house into those gardens near the tilt yard, and there'd be two people there kind of jousting with feathers.
That's right.
Someone walking a wire between two trees, or a woman in a smock kind of playing flute under your hedge.
I tell you, the weird thing about psych-folk is I kind of lived through that era, but I don't really know what the term means. So, yeah, but I'm aware there's a lot of people talk about it and collect that stuff and so on. Am I correct in saying that stuff just never happened at the time?
I
it's
think
entirely being discovered 30 years later. I
definitely think that's the case with acid folk. And that's it's become a much, and people call it acid folk or psych folk. But when you're talking about the British stuff, and I very much think when people use acid folk, they're usually talking about the British stuff like Dr. Strangely Strange or The Tree, Mellow Candle, things like that. But there was so little of it as well. It's like it's such a frustratingly small genre, and it's a bit like folk horror films. It's like you want there to be more masterpieces, like The Wicker Man, where in reality there's not many really.
Absolutely, that's so true. That's so true. Because isn't it? You must experience this. Spending time in record fairs and with other record collections and so forth. I get the feeling that there are people nowadays know far more about the music of the past than the people who were there at the time.
It does seem so.
There's just more focus on it. You know what I mean? Trees, good example.
Yeah.
Trees were on CBS, a couple of albums. They were always on compilation albums. Nobody ever talked about Trees, ever. Did they, Mark?
No, not remotely.
30 years later, you could probably organize a conference.
People are probably producing documentaries about it. Exactly.
About them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can't remember how I heard the Trees. It was probably a very slightly older, very knowledgeable folk head who told me about them in probably when I was about 22, 1998 or something like that. And I remember I bought On the Shore by the Trees in a music and video exchange in Notting Hill. It wasn't an original, because even then the originals were, I think they're like 500 quid now, and they were already
really
then. And
have you got one, Dave?
No, I'm not going to trade. But if somebody told me one of my records was worth 500 quid, I think, well, so what? What are you going to do with it?
You're not going to sell it. This is
no, not really. No, that's absolutely extraordinary. So what else have you got there? Have you got anything? Show us stuff. Go on.
Well, I don't know. I was thinking about Julian Cope today because I was looking through old photos. Here's Will Shut Your Mouth and my favourite, which is Fried by Julian Cope.
Right.
Where he's kind of on his most sort of Jim Morrison
turtle shell. Yeah.
But I found a photo of Julian Cope licking my face in 1994, which I only found the digital version of it. I can't find the actual thing to show you, but that was in Nottingham Virgin Megastore in 1994 at a signing for his autobiography Head On, and that there were only about 8 people there, but we were all obsessive Cope fans and loved him so much.
And all had your faces licked. Yes.
I think so. Yeah, he was always such good fun. Because I used to be like full-time music writer, which I kind of left behind quite many years ago.
You were at the Enemy at one stage, weren't you?
I started at the Enemy, and then I started writing more about old music. So I went to Uncut, and then I was the Guardian's music critic for just a year. But I interviewed so many people, but really Cope was the one who. He had the biggest effect on me. I just remember shaking his hand, and it was like electricity flowing up my arm. And he was just such an inspiring, effervescent person to meet. Like people say, oh, you interviewed this big legend from the 60s. And all I can think is half an hour in a hotel room and nothing very remarkable. But him, I went to his house in Wiltshire, and I just remember him hanging out of the upstairs window with his his face painted and with shades on, saying, "Hi, I thought I'd paint my face orange today. How you doing?" And then he gave me one of his Scott Walker records as well that he'd bought for next to nothing in the early 80s.
I always thought it must be very hard work being Julian Cope, because you can't just go down to the corner shop and buy a pint of milk without kind of wearing a kind of war helmet and a kind of a strange cape and stuff and massive boots with studs on them.
I do wonder about that. The people of places
very much kind of the person full on the entire time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That can be kind of tiring. I think I experimented with that a bit, because I suppose I had more of a hippie look a few years ago, and I sort of think you kind of become your look a bit too much, and and then people expect it of you, and then like I was wearing a headband and I had my hair quite long, and it's people are really disappointed if you don't do it for a while.
Yeah.
It is quite tiring.
A headband, that's incredible. God.
Yeah,
a real Glenn Cornick of Jethro Tull headband.
Yeah.
The proper
I was actually modelling it.
He always looked like something out of the Two Ronnies, didn't he, Glenn Cornick? He always looked as if he was
like, central casting with a wig.
It's Ronnie Corbett dressed as a hippie. That's just what he looked like. He never looked convincing at all. I want to ask you, one of the things you on your post, which I was just looking at this morning, you're talking about the time, I can't remember, the time you worked on a newspaper or whatever, and talking about just how many records you used to review and how people don't realize, how superficial is the acquaintance that writers have with albums that they review.
Absolutely. And I mean, in those days, less so than the 70s and the 80s, when the Enemy sold so many copies and people would buy it and go, this is the gospel opinion a lot of the time. It wasn't quite like that, but there was still people had more regard for what a music journalist would say about something. I think in the days when I was starting a bit, but there was this thing of like, you've just got to remember, your opinion means nothing really. You've just arbitrarily been put in this position where you say if something's good or not, and it's ridiculous. I'm not even a musician. I've started to learn guitar now, but like then I could play nothing. I knew nothing really about the technical side of music. I'd have the power to just slag something off on the first page of the Guardian Friday Review every week. And I feel quite bad now thinking about some of the things that I dismissed quite quickly, because you'd get the record.
But you've got to, because otherwise you'd never get anything done.
You've got to. And also what you tend to do is you finish up reviewing the band and the idea of the band and reviewing the sense of their last album rather than the new album. I remember starting a thing on Q very briefly where people wrote about records they lived with for 3 months. And if you live with a record for 3 months, then you really do have an opinion of whether or not it has any value. But the trouble is that has no commercial appeal, because we need to know when it comes out if it's any good.
Yeah, you just can't do that. I mean, really, you need 10 years, don't you? Records change.
Or in the case of Trees, about 40 years, 50 years.
But people just love, arguing about this stuff. And I had a really odd one that just occurred in my life in the last week or so. Somebody started posting a load of old reviews from Sounds on Twitter. And there was a review the other week of a Brian Eno album that I reviewed in 1979. I had no memory of reviewing it at all. And anyway, this week, somebody turned up with a review of me doing a live review of The Members in 1979. I have no memory whatsoever. And they're arguing about what I said. I'm thinking, this is more than 40 years ago.
Yeah.
This is The Members. I don't remember it. Why does this matter to anybody? But still somebody 40 years later will go, I think you got that wrong.
Yeah, I think the third number they played was, and that the PA was perfectly all right. You were just standing in the wrong place.
You're supposed to have exactly the right opinion, and it's supposed to stay totally concrete for 50 years as well. Yeah. And we all change our mind about things. Of course you do. I think someone might have shown me something recently. I think it was an old review of this band Broadcast that I wrote. Do you know Broadcast at all?
No, I don't.
They were like they were very influenced by sort of American, really weird American psychedelic stuff, like slightly droney kind of trance-like stuff, but they were a bit electro as well and very British. And they're very revered now. They were fantastic. One of the best bands of the 90s, if you ask me, and early 2000s. And the singer died young, and since then they've just got like, they've got so many more people just raving about what a lost band they were. And I really liked them, but I think one of their records, when it came out, I had like 3 days to evaluate it, and I thought it was disappointing compared to the one before. And because I kind of put that across, someone's dug out the old review and they're saying, how could he say
Tom
this?
Cox, what does he know?
Yeah. But now, I'd say it's a 5-star out of 5 record, but I just didn't have that time.
But people want to. They love to say something is criminally underrated. They love to say that.
Yeah.
And people.
It makes them look good.
It's you still get people who say Nick Drake underrated. You know, no,
that's not true now.
Nick Drake never commercial, but really rated. Actually, overrated probably slightly.
Yeah, rated at the time actually by the very few people who knew about
very few people. You know, but they, nobody goes around. Saying you're a fan of Coldplay doesn't win you any points at all, does it? Because Coldplay are really famous. Whereas doing the same thing about broadcast.
And I'm aware of that. I'm always kind of questioning myself whether I'm doing that, whether I'm kind of just going on about a record because it's slightly lost. It seems slightly damaged by the world in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going, come on, Tom, how much do you actually like this? I'm always, and I'm really swept away by the legend of things. But I also know there are only so many lost albums out there. And Record Store Day now a lot of it seems to be about the industry of lost albums.
Yeah.
People say, oh, we found another 8 tracks by this person from 1971 that you have to have. But really, do you have to have them? And are they really any good?
No, it's out of all proportion now, isn't it? So you don't go to record stores on Record Store Day and stock up on.
I don't do Record Store Day at all because I sort of for me I just like old things. I like old dusty things.
Right. So it's the kind of antique side of it as part of the appeal for you.
Absolutely, because I'm the same with weird bits of old pottery and old lamps,
right,
and books. I'm just as bad with books as I'm with records, really. But
also, you're not a completist, are you? Because Record Store Day really is for completists. If you like Morrissey, you've got to have everything connected with Morrissey, and we've just invented a new one.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm not like that at all. And it's also it's kind of like a hunter-gatherer thing for me as well. It's like going out into the wild and just being totally surprised. I don't go in with a record fair, for example. I don't go in with a list. I'm just kind of freeform, and I'm just kind of like, I just want to see something that I've never seen before.
So do most people go in with lists?
I think some people do. Some people prefer to be more organized. I definitely did when I was 17 or 18, because I was kind of like, because what happened with me, I was obsessed with football, snooker, badminton, golf was the big one for me. And then I got rescued from golf at the age of 16, 17 by David Byrne. Because my mum and dad, I was always a big Talking Heads fan as a kid, but my mum and dad took me to see David Byrne in June 1992 at Nottingham Royal Concert Hall, and at that point I was going to be a professional golfer.
Really?
Good Lord!
I dropped out of college.
So you're presumably quite good.
I was all right. I wasn't as good as you have to be. But I was like one handicap, which is kind of fairly close to like what's almost professional standard. And I worked as a waiter and to try and support myself to play in amateur tournaments. And I completely messed up at school because on my report, my final year report card, on one of the, it was biology, and my teacher wrote, Tom is not bothered about this subject because he wants to be, in inverted commas, wants to be a golfer. So that was my life. And then I saw David Byrne do all these Talking Head songs that I'd loved when I was 7 or 8. And I just went, sod that. I'm going to be a
This
music
is better
writer.
than golf.
He put his clubs in the bin like a P.G. Woodhouse story. That's absolutely amazing.
Exactly.
I want to know about it. So, okay, so you must have, because of your history in golf, you must have observed the number of musicians who play golf.
Yeah, Alice Cooper. I've played golf with Rick Wakeman in the past.
Oh, God, who's the best?
Okay,
who's the best musical golfer?
Mike Miles, maybe, or Peter Buck, aren't they all golfers?
Yeah, I heard
R.E.M.
that. Yeah,
Mike Mills. Sorry, what am I talking about? Yeah,
Alice Cooper's properly good, I think.
Yeah.
There's a country star who's very good who can't. Is it Vince Gill? Is Vince Gill one of those guys? He's really seriously
Justin
good.
Timberlake's good as well.
Oh, really? Because it's one of those things, one of those pursuits you can combine with touring, isn't it?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
turn up in a city, you play on the.
But it's there was this idea in probably around 2004 that golf was becoming cool, but that's never ever actually going to happen.
No,
Lloyd Cole was that another one?
Yeah,
Lloyd Cole. But I don't think anyone has succeeded in making it cool, have they?
Still playing courses. He's posting about it at the moment.
Right, yeah, and because his one of the Commotions, Lawrence Donegan, he was in the Commotions, wasn't he?
Yeah, he became a Guardian sports writer, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah, before that, he wrote a book about being a caddy on the Pro Tour.
Oh, really?
Which is very good. And
it's still none of this ever makes golf fashionable. No matter how many rock stars in baseball caps are out there.
And it doesn't. And I actually don't. I mean, I still occasionally have an urge to hit a ball, but I don't play anymore. And I kind of view it as you're being complicit in sort of destroying the countryside as well.
Yeah,
that's my view of golf.
Is it also the case you can't be sexy on a golf course?
I don't think.
Whereas most other sports have got some sexual component. There's a kind of glamour about footballers, cricketers, whatever.
There's never really.
You're wearing tartan trousers. It's a handicap, isn't it?
Yeah, there's never,
you're wearing tartan trousers.
Pin-up golfer, has there, for anyone?
No.
But what happened to me because of that? I missed out on this prime sort of teenage. Kind of going out and discovering music. Like, when I was 15, I wasn't going and seeing the Stone Roses like I should have been. I was trying to kind of train to win the British Open. So I woke up after this David Byrne concert and went, right, what do I need to know about? And I just went out and just tried to find out about everything,
A copy of your finest new musical express, please, sir.
Exactly.
Yes.
Had to buy Slanted and Enchanted by Pavement, had to buy Bug by Dinosaur Jr. I quizzed everyone I knew about, what should I hear? And I just consumed it all. And all of a sudden I had like 100 cassettes where
Have you ever met David Byrne? I think he would be very impressed by if you told him the story. I mean, that would really have an impact, wouldn't it?
He's one of those. I interviewed him in Cambridge, probably in about 1998, 99. And I don't remember much about it. And I don't remember him being massively friendly, but I think it might have been one of those cases where someone's just been so much in your head, their music, for all your life, you've built up this idea that they're going to be the loveliest person you've ever met.
Yeah.
And you're going to get on with them like a house on fire. And he was not that chatty. And
no,
I
he's not.
remember being disappointed because
he's a little bit distant, isn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't have the kind of easy charm that some of these people have. So listen, the way we normally we finish these chats is we ask people to tell us what is the greatest record ever made. You must have an answer to that question, Tom.
Oh yes,
what's today's answer?
Ever? No, not really. It changes every week. So I decided that this is the perfect record the other day, and it's a single. Right. Can you see it here?
Yeah.
Larry Williams and Johnny Watson.
Johnny Guitar Watson.
Yeah, Johnny Guitar Watson. Just in his other guys is Johnny Watson here. Nobody.
No guitar. Yes.
The reason this is so perfect, it's just the right kind of length. I think it's just under. It's 2 minutes 45, and it's funky but psychedelic at the same time. And the backing band on this are Kaleidoscope, the American Kaleidoscope.
Well, David Lindley and so forth.
Yeah, so it's got
That's extra.
guitar on it.
Yeah,
That record has just been invented. That record has been invented.
You invented that just for this
Purely
morning.
so a guy 50 years later can find it.
Yeah.
Now let's get this straight. Is this Larry Williams as in Boney Maroney Larry
Exactly,
Williams?
yeah.
And it's Johnny Guitar Watson as in Ain't That a Bitch. And then it's Kaleidoscope as in Scopes Collide or whatever.
Yeah, it's such an unlikely combination. It's got sitar on it, but it's also got grunting on it.
Sitar and grunting.
They must have listened back to the mix and whenever it was in the late 60s, early 70s or whatever, and thought, well, it's going to do nothing. But 50 years' time, a bloke on Dartmoor
will be holding it up to something called
just
a
written
Zoom.
a book about a mythical village. We'll be holding it up in a thing called a video cast and explaining that's absolutely
and telling everyone he's got the only copy in the world.
I want to know what is the equivalent of that now. What record has just been made that this is going to be happening to in 55 years?
I guarantee none. Because
you don't think that's still going to happen?
I
can't imagine in 50 years' time.
A Larry Williams and a Johnny Guitar Watson and then a Kaleidoscope. I don't know. You'd have to believe that I don't know.
Well, things don't get lost in the same way. That's the problem, isn't it?
If it was going to be found, it'd be found quite quickly, would really. Yeah. Whereas a huge part of the appeal of that is you've found it years later.
Exactly, and it's not going to be an artifact now, is it? It's going to be some download of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the physical object that's so beautiful.
It is
fantastic.
But I've got
so much fun. Tom, it's been lovely to talk to you.
You too. Thank you.
Really, really good. I think.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.